Hi everyone, this is Tony D of rpstock.net. In this episode of Behind the Shot, I'm going to do a breakdown of how I composited this time-lapse of the Dallas city skyline. Now, most time-lapses don't require so much attention, but this shot required a little extra effort to get this result that we have here. Most time-lapses would require full manual settings, but when you're going back and forth between stills and video, some mistakes can happen. For this instance here, we had accidentally left image stabilization on. And this is what you get when you leave IS on. The camera was constantly recalibrating the lens to take a steady shot. And for time lapses, it's just not a good thing, as you can see. It looked like we had either a few drinks that night or a lot of coffee. So unfortunately, this shot was the only one we took from this bridge, and we wanted to see if we could salvage it somehow. So I'll walk you through how I got to this. All right, so here we are in Lightroom. This is where we processed all the raws, as you can see. This is a 4-second exposure to get those nice light trails. Everything looked great at first, but again, once this was rendered out, it turned to be ugly. So once those were processed into JPEGs, we arrive in After Effects. Now here we are. The first image sequence was warp stabilized. Now this first layer was literally an attempt to see how well After Effects could stabilize this shot. With the basic settings, I think it came up pretty well. With a quick RAM preview, you can see it did a pretty good job locking down the road for the most part. But the city skyline, as you can see, looks pretty wonky. This is just what happens when you have image stabilization on. So how do we fix that? Now, the best way that I found was to find a sharp frame throughout the sequence and then freeze it. And if I solo this next layer, that's how I layered them. I just pretty much just feathered right above the road. And combined, it came out pretty well. Now there's some more tricks here that we could do to kind of make this background of the skyline look like it's like it has some life. So the next layer here is pretty much the tower lights removed. Now you could clone them out in Photoshop if you'd like, or you could clone them out right here in After Effects. My method was pretty simple. I just used a simple mask and nudged the layer over. With a little feather, they're gone. So what I did next was to composite lights back on to the layer, but with some opacity keyframes and an expression to loop out, just randomized the tower lights as they turned on and off throughout the sequence here. Didn't want it to be too obnoxious and noticeable. They're just really subtle opacity adjustments. I generally, when you're doing this kind of thing, you don't want to call too much attention to it, because then otherwise it'll just it'll look like you're trying to fix it. But it's subjective, so to each his own. So the next 3 layers here, if I solo these, turn these on, you'll see that my attempt was to try and find areas of the sequence where the tower was off, so I could composite the actual stabilized shot back on top of it. And if I turn this layer on, you'll see this is the actual shot stabilized. And then all I added was a levels adjustment where I crushed the blacks. And let me just hide all these real quick so you can see. And this is what the layer looks like. And then screened back on top of the original group of layers here. So if I just RAM preview that, you can see that that's the actual time lapse of the tower lights. That was the best way to kind of composite them back on, the actual freeze frame that I used for the skyline. And when you play it back, looks pretty convincing. So another issue we had here is this little smudge on the lens. I'm not sure where that came from, but that was just pretty much taken out. Now another technique I used for the buildings to give it some life, as if there was, there's some nightlife going on throughout the center city, was to add some adjustment layers, and I called these building flickers. And all they pretty much were is a levels adjustment with a mask that I outlined a few buildings of the downtown area. And if I reveal the keyframes, it's just essentially the opacity going on, subtle adjustments, and I randomized it and then looped them out. You see these subtle adjustments of actual life going on downtown. I did that for this area over here, as well as this building and this building here. So the goal here was to do some subtle tweaks to the skyline to give it some life throughout the time lapse, as you could see here. My next layer here, I just pretty much blurred out this billboard so you didn't see what was going on there. I'm not sure what was being advertised, but remove that. And the next adjustment layers was to pretty much clean up the final image and apply some color correction. This next layer, I used Denoiser, which is a Magic Bullet Red Giant plugin, just to clean up some of the artifacting and to sharpen it. And as I toggle that on, you can see that it takes a little bit while to render, but the skyline is a little bit sharper and it's less noisy. Now, color correcting this was straightforward. I did two curves adjustments here, one for the road, one for the sky. The first one was just bring down as you can see on this S curve, I just added a little contrast to the road. And then for the sky, it just looked a little flat to me. So I applied this very contrasty S curve, as well as boosted the blues to give it that blue night sky. And pulling the blues out of the highlights gave it a nice blue-orange look. And that was essentially it. That's the entire composite of the shot. And there was only one last thing that I wanted to do, and that was to add one uniform grain to this time lapse. Now you could do that with the built-in plugins of After Effects, or you can use a third-party plugin. What I used was actually one of rpstock.net's freebies packs. If you go to our website, it's our grain overlay pack. You see it's a free download. It's part of our large group of freebies that you could download. This pack will have 10 4K grain overlays to blend over your footage, ranging from 35mm to 8mm, all different styles. Now, they're all based off 50% gray. So once you drop it onto your comp, all you have to do is use overlay. And there you go. Let me just toggle this on and off so you can see. Now, to most people, this is pretty subjective as well. How much grain you want to add, it's a personal taste. To me, when you have a still image or a freeze frame like I have here, one thing when you watch video back is that if it's missing grain, you can see that it's not an actual time lapse, because when you have moving pictures, image to image, you're going to have the grain structure is never going to be the same. So having that little layer of grain to blend over top your final sequence is just a finishing touch, in my opinion. Now, it's subjective. If you don't want any grain, you want a clean image, that's up to you. But I think it adds something, and it looks like moving video. So that's pretty much it. This is what we had before, our little whoopsie, and this is what we ended with. And sometimes putting in that little extra effort to salvage a shot is worth it. And this turned out to be one of my favorite time lapses, actually. So glad it worked out. Hopefully next time we turn off image stabilization on the lens. So thanks for watching, guys. Check out our freebies at rpstock.net and let us know if there's anything else you'd like to see. Till the next time, see you later.